All right, welcome to the Red Wheelbarrow Poetry Collective. Tonight we have a very special featured poet who I'm sure we're all excited to hear from. Stephen Devereux is an academic at the universities of Sussex in the UK and Western Cape in South Africa. In 2020, at the age of 60, he completed a master's in creative writing at the University of the Western Cape. His poems have been published in several British and South African magazines, including Botsotso, Imago, New Coin, New Contrast, and Stanzas. And one of his poems placed third in the South Africa's National Poetry Prize in 2020. Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, Melissa, and I'm very grateful to the Red Wheelbarrow Collective for this invitation. I'm going to dedicate this reading to my mother. So today is the 6th of June. 4 days ago, on the 2nd of June last year, my mother passed away, so it's just over a year ago. And 2 days ago, it was her 87th birthday. My mother always used to say that my poetry was very morbid and dark, which is true, actually. Most of it is. So I stopped writing for a very long time. And when I started writing again in my late 50s, she said, "So are you still writing poems with blood dripping down the walls?" And I said, "No, there's no blood dripping down the walls, don't worry." But since I've decided to make this reading a tribute to my mother, I'm focusing on the lighter poems. I struggled to find in my oeuvre anything light and humorous, but I did find some. So I'm going to try and keep it light most of the time and not morbid. But the last 9 or 10 poems will be about my mother, and some of them are quite sad. But let's start off with the light relief. So you read a very lovely poem by Mary Oliver, Melissa, which was nice. I've also got some famous poems which I have variations of. I made some versions or deviations from some famous classical poems, and these were also favorites of my mother, these poems. So variations. Let's start with Someone by Walter Delamere. I'm sure you're all familiar with that poem. Someone came knocking at my wee small door. Someone came knocking, I'm sure, sure, sure. I listened, I opened, I looked to left and right, but naught there was a stirring in the still dark night. And this is my version of that poem. Someone came knocking at my wee small door, but I couldn't let him in, he was 6'4". Second one is Daffodils by Wordsworth. Equally famous, I think. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. And here's my slightly rude version. I wandered lonely in my cloud of methane. It helped disperse the crowd. Now, one of my favorite poems, The Wasteland, T.S. Eliot, with its very famous opening lines. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. And my version, which is maybe not quite as good, goes like this. April is the cruelest month, especially April the 1st. And the last of my variations is by William Carlos Williams, not the Red Wheelbarrow, which he wrote, as we know, but another poem of his called This Is Just to Say. And this is his poem. This is just to say, I've eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. And here's my version. This is just to say, I've eaten the icebox, which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, it was delicious, so sweet and so cold. Okay, so keeping things light, I'm going to now read to you the very first poem I ever wrote, which I dug up from my box in the back of the cupboard. And I wrote this poem in March 1974, so that's 50 years ago, and I was 14, and it's called The Swallow. Of course, it's not meant to be funny. I thought it was a serious poem, but looking back, maybe not. The swallow, what it is to be a bird, to fly high up where never a word, or roar or drone or any other sound, can penetrate your heaven high above the ground, where the air is still and the earth looks serene, and only Mother Nature is queen. Okay, so it goes on like that for quite a while. So we'll jump to the end, where it ends like this. But now you turn and bow, then spin and glide, and hover and dive. Faster and faster you fade away, till only a speck, nay, only a dot, blemishes the sky. Only a dot to remember you by. Okay, the remaining poems will be much more recent than that juvenilia. So here are 3 poems about God. I write poems about God which are mercifully very short. So these are very short ones. The first one is called Genesis. Before the Big Bang, before God created man, God created God. Tsunami. Deep in space, God's lapdog laps the world. For best results. For best results, start again. It works every time. It's why God invented children. And here are some other short poems. Pillow. I am your pillow. I sleep all day. I work all night. How to leave home. What do you need to leave home? Keys, phone, wallet, a home to leave. Youth versus experience. I settle into an easy canter behind my assailant. He has my wallet. It looks like he's getting away. He has youth on his side, but I have experience. Trust me, experience doesn't help in that situation. Existential debate. Please remind me, I asked a mosquito, why exactly do you exist? Remind me first, the mosquito replied. Why exactly do you exist? And the last one of these short, funny ones is actually a limerick. It's for one of my best friends called Barry. A fickle young laddie called Larry dumped Gary to marry Barry. But a problem arose when, in passionate throes, Barry caught Larry with Harry. Okay, and the last batch of short, funny ones are kind of like Clary Hughes, and they are from when I was living in Namibia. They're called Namibia Animals. So they are different poems about animals. The first one is called Vlad the Impala, which of course is a pun on Vlad the Impaler, who inspired Dracula. So Vlad the Impala met a waterbuck called Carla at a swimming gala. Come into my parlor, said the Impala to Carla. Do you like Marla? Mabel the Sable. Have you heard the fable of Mabel the Sable? She built a gable on her stable, but stood on a cable under her table, which blew her higher than the Tower of Babel. Leonard the Leopard. Leonard the man-eating leopard loves his meat served tepid, salted and peppered. Rory the Cory Bustard. A Cory Bustard is a type of bird. Rory the Cory Bustard liked hot dogs and mustard. One day he was shot by an English clot who served him up with custard. And the last Namibia animal is called Geraldine the Giraffe. When Geraldine the Giraffe gave birth to a bouncing calf, she said with a giraffe laugh, "You're like me, but half." And that's the end of the short poems. Now, a longer one that's also meant to be humorous is called Selling Typewriters to Millennials. Will you buy this? What do you mean, what is it? It's a typewriter, of course. Oh, you've heard of them. I'm so glad you've heard of them. Well, now you've seen one too. Will you buy it? What do you mean, what's it for? It's a typewriter. It's for typing your writing. You do write, don't you? Well, now you can write using this. So will you buy it? Yes, I know you use computers these days, but these keys are just like the keyboard on your laptop or tablet. It's a QWERTY design. No, it wasn't invented by Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. It was designed for Remington typewriters in the 1800s. Yes, even before I was born. Are you interested? Where's the monitor? It doesn't have a monitor. It doesn't need a monitor or a screen. It types onto this ribbon, black and red. It doesn't even need a printer. It prints as you type. So that's a bonus with the cost of cartridges these days. So are you interested? No, there's no delete key. If you make a mistake, you just white it out and type again. Tell you what, if you buy my typewriter, I'll throw in this bottle of Tipex for free. Are you tempted? Here's the clincher. This Olivetti is 50 years old and it still works, even during stage 8 load shedding and long-haul flights. How many computers can make that claim? Do you want it? You know you do. Think different. Be what's next. And this one is called Baltic States of Mind, as in the Baltic States. You know it's 3 a.m. when you find yourself lying awake, wondering what language they speak in Latvia. So you Google it in the dark. It's Latvian. And Lithuania? Lithuanian. You resist the OCD temptation to complete the Baltic trio by Googling Estonia and try to fall asleep instead. But it keeps you awake until you succumb. Estonian. So now you find yourself lying awake wondering what people in Riga and Vilnius and Tallinn are lying awake wondering about at 3 a.m. What questions preoccupy them and send them to their cell phones, searching for answers that light up their screens as they lie on their backs on this freezing winter night, Googling in the dark. Okay, so that's the end of what I call the light relief section. There's now going to be a series of about 5 poems which are about Cape Town. Let's say portraits of people in Cape Town. And then I'll come on to the poems about my mother. So this one is called A Simple Request. And it starts with a headline from the Cape Times, from the Cape Argus. Lwandley shack fire leaves 4 dead. I am your neighbor in Vulindlela Street, here in Lwandley. You know me. It is so cold here in Lwandley. You know this. Last night it was too cold. Your paraffin lamp fell over, spreading heat and flames through your shack and mine, warming your family and mine. I have a simple request. Fill some buckets with water at night. Don't sleep with your blanket so close to the lamp. Don't toss and turn in your restless sleep, dreaming your fear, and kick your lamp over in the night. Wake up, look at the burning all around you. Hold your arms out wide. Close your arms around the flames. Breathe in deeply, breathe in the flames. Carefully exhale the fire back into the lamp. The man in the doorway. The man in the doorway always speaks his mind. It's what landed him here. Ek is off tik almost 2 years now. Ek weet nie waar is my kinders. He holds 4 fingers to his mouth. The other hand orbits his stomach. Borrow me 10 rand. I will give you back on all payday. Meneer weet jy kan my trust. You pass by every day. Ek is altyd hier. I is going nowhere. He smiles a sly, toothless grin. I got better stories of my life, amper like yours. Jy weet, if God was colored, you would be sleeping here. Ek so Javius. Green Market Square, Saturday morning. And this starts with a placard that a homeless man was holding up, and this is what it said. I am Andile, I am ashamed but hungry. Please help, God blessed. I'm not asking for a lot, just 10 rand for a sticky brood or a hot chocolate. Ek vra mos, I'm not going to rob you, I'm only asking. Why does everybody say no today? Dit lyk my julle mense het jou Ubuntu by die huis vergeet vanoggend. Even God doesn't want to buy kak for me today. Dis mos maar net so. Hey, cash for gold lady, you are the queen of my world. The A to Z of leaving. The homeless man who likes to talk to me about God and the cold wind and seagulls, how their screeching stops him sleeping, has peopled his bench on the promenade with 3 heavy-duty refuse bags stuffed with the detritus of other people's lives, Coke Zero bottles, beer cans, pizza boxes, and other useful, used and empty things. They sit together like overweight friends, leaning on each other in companionable silence, necks neatly tied with red drawstrings. Meet A and B and C, he tells me. I'm saving up to send them to Algeria and Brazil and China so they can see the world. You want to make a small contribution? What about you, I ask. Don't you want to travel too? Not for me, he shrugs. I like my life here. I'm not leaving unless Home Affairs sends me back to Zim in a bus or a box. I open my wallet. I make my small contribution to the non-travel fund. And the last one in this sequence about Cape Town is about people who go swimming in Sea Point swimming pool even in winter, of which I am one. I was swimming there this afternoon. And it's called 3 Old Farts in Wetsuits. Sea Point swimming pool closes at 4 in winter, so I get there around 3 p.m. as usual. Tweedledum and Tweedledee are already there. Dum is breaststroking slowly in the middle lane. Dee asks me to zip up his wetsuit. It's colder than it looks today. Don't be fooled by the sun. He says it's like liquid ice, nodding his head towards Dum. We wave at Dum like we're best friends forever. Dee pulls his swimming cap over his white hair, inserts earplugs, fits nose clip, straps on goggles. I follow suit. Wetsuit, ha ha. Dee zips me up. See you at the deep end, he says, as always. Thumbs up as he jumps into the freezing water. Why do people do what people do? Seagulls line the poolside, patiently waiting for the pool to clear, for the 3 old farts in wetsuits to leave the freezing water and return to the freezing air, to climb the stairs again to our separate lives, for the coldness to seep out of our wetsuits, onto the floors and into the walls of our silent winter rooms. Okay, so we're coming to the final sequence of poems, which is about my mother. The first one is not really about her, but it's childhood memories, some of which include her or mention her. And this is a list poem. It's based, the format comes from Dennis Hurston's famous book, I Remember King Kong the Boxer, which has got just a book full of lines starting, I remember. So this poem is also called I Remember. I remember crying when an old lady walked past my bedroom door, but I could see right through her. Years later, my mother asked, "Do you remember when you saw a ghost?" I remember the Golden Dragon restaurant on the foreshore, the exoticness of bow ties and white rabbits, the magical way the rice paper wrappers just melted on my tongue. I remember the Goodwood Drive-In, how I would hide on the back floor so I could stay for the midnight movie, which was always too scary or too sexy for children to watch. I remember St. Paul's Parochial School for Boys, First Holy Communion at Our Lady of the Wayside, a priest laying candles on our throats to protect against Friday fishbones. I remember when, after practicing holding my breath in the bath, I swam the length of my school swimming pool underwater, how it felt like I could hold my breath forever. I remember catching the train to school from Kenilworth to Newlands, running as fast as Gerry Germeshuis, scoring a try to cross the lines before the booms came down. I remember listening to Springbok radio during school holidays, the White Oaks of Jalna, Mondays to Fridays, and Pip Friedman pretending to be a coloured on Saturdays. I remember David Gresham counting down the top 20 on Friday nights, the shock when Peter McCann's Do You Want to Make Love falling from number 1 to nowhere after being banned. I remember when TV arrived, Blitz Patrollie, Cockneys talking Afrikaans, Biltong and Pot Roast, man those Oaks were funny, and The Cosby Show, blacks living like whites. I remember patrolling our school all night after Soweto in June 1976, in case they tried to burn it down, and reporting for the army at the castle next January, how scared I was. I remember Esme Everard presenting Force's favourites for our boys on the border on Saturday afternoons. A message from home, our reward for surviving another week in hell. I remember the army base at the Skobelos in Kimberley, the Afrikaner boy in the next bed polishing his boots and saying, "Jy weet, vir so 'n skrale mannetjie, jy het 'n baie groot bek." I bet most of you don't remember many of those memories from my childhood. You have to be really old. Okay, and these are poems about my mother. So my mother lived independently until about 3 or 4 years ago. And obviously we would go and visit her at least once a week. So the first 2 poems are about visiting her. The first one is called My Mother's Red Ferrari. My mother opens her front door and shuffles back to her sofa, pushing her walker that we call her Red Ferrari, sits down with a wince, asks me how my week has been. She is scared of everything and everyone. My mother's memories are of someone I never knew. When I was young, I was very trusting. Once I sat on the back of a motorbike with a man I only met the day before, and he drove us through the Karoo at 80 miles an hour. I was terrified. I held onto his leather jacket for dear life. I shouted in his ear, "Slow down. No, no, go faster, faster." My mother's memories are of someone I never knew. Nothing is more important. Nothing is more important now than the memory behind the fridge magnet from Tulbach on my mother's fridge. If only she could remember that day. If only she could remember that year. So about 3 years ago, my mother started to fall a lot and got ill and was hospitalized a few times. So this poem is about a visit that I made to her in hospital. Stethoscopes and orchids. Why don't doctors wear stethoscopes anymore, you ask? It used to be part of their uniform, like the white coat and black trousers and shiny shoes. Nowadays, it's all dirty jeans and sneakers. Trainers, I say, not sneakers, as I check your phone for messages. Well, they look just like fancy tackies to me. Anyway, my point is you can't tell the doctors from the visitors these days. The doctor who came this morning was a young coloured woman, or Indian. I thought she had come to wash me, but she was ever so nice. The old lady in the bed next door. Don't look now, but her daughter bought her that purple orchid. Do you see it? I am a son, and I bought fruit. Should I have brought flowers? I like orchids, I say. They seem so exotic. I've never liked orchids, you say. My favourite flowers are snowbells. Where will I find snowbells? You are fiddling with your drip. I know it could have been worse, you say, but it's hard not being able to do all the things I used to do. Old age is not for sissies. You are looking at me, but not. So the next poem is called Two Elizabeths, September 2022. And the 2 Elizabeths I have to explain probably. My mother's name was Elizabeth, and Queen Elizabeth of England died in September 2022. 2 Elizabeth, September 2022. My mother's room. Nazareth House. Mrs. Elizabeth Devereux on the door. Sad news about the Queen, I say. Yes, she agrees. I can't believe she was shot. You'd think they would have proper security. I mean, she is the Queen. I WhatsApp my brother. Mom thinks the Queen was shot. He replies immediately, maybe she was. Do you remember when the Queen came to Cape Town, Mom? It was 1947. She was still Princess Elizabeth. You were 10 years old. All the girls from Claremont Primary lined Main Road, and you waved Union Jacks at her when her car drove past. Did I? You did, Mom. I know you did. Yes, so I maybe should have explained. My mother moved into Nazareth House, a wonderful residential care home in Cape Town, just before the Queen died, 2022. So this is also a visit to Nazareth House, and this one is called Roaming Holiday. There is a memory not yet lost that she pulls down from the top shelf when I visit, but it hooks another memory on the way down and tumbles them together into something new. I'm thinking of buying a Vespa, she announces, as I reverse her wheelchair down the ramp to the garden. Roman Holiday was one of her favorite movies. Audrey Hepburn was always her favorite role. I do not know if she fancied Gregory Peck on his Vespa. She must have. Who didn't? Remember when he puts his hand in the mouth of truth and pretends it's been bitten off? The look on Audrey Hepburn's face. They say he improvised. She was genuinely shocked she wasn't acting. This is the memory I want her to remember. But she is in 1993, not 1953. I just think it will be easier to get to work with all the traffic these days. But what if it rains? I can't hold an umbrella on a Vespa. And she laughs, just like Audrey Hepburn, as I wheel her up the ramp to the TV lounge. And then on the 2nd of June last year, my mother passed away at Nazareth House. All the things in her room that are suddenly pointless. The clock still ticks the time for no one to hear. The television's black screen no longer watched. The hairbrush on the pedestal, the spectacles. Books in the bookcase that she will not read. Books she selected as a reader, but within 6 months she was no longer a book reader. As each thing became pointless, it diminished and bewildered her. She got lost inside herself, lost in the night, calling for her son in the dark. Fell asleep after breakfast, didn't wake up. Jesus looks down from his cross at the empty bed. Close the door, leave the room, leave it as it always was and never will be. Motherless. You have lost a loved one. Curious phrase, loved one. Before we each knew the other, before we were both loved ones, she danced the Highland Fling and the intricate sword dance. She had a husband and lovers who loved her. Aged 63, I enter the category of unaccompanied children. Something is waiting for me in the next room, a certain inadmissible relief. Ancestors. Greet our ancestors when you see them. Granny Nell and Uncle Ian, Great Aunt Dee, your Uncle Gorg and Auntie Dora, second cousin Anselm. Greet the ancestors I know, and those I do not yet know. I will meet them soon. I will see you soon. I will see you in the blink of an ancestor's eye. And this is the last one. It's called We Walk, and because it's easier to see this on the page than if I read it out loud, I'll explain that it's in reverse chronological order until the last stanza. We walk. We walked, tentative down the hospital corridor. You, stiff and shaky, gripped your walking frame tight, fearful of falling, and then you fell. We walked up and down the supermarket aisles. You left your walking stick in the car. You pushed a shopping trolley for balance. Your new knee was playing up again. We walked in awe among the rock churches of Lalibela on the day before your 60th birthday. Our guide offered you his arm as we descended steeply to St. George. It was built by men by day and angels by night. We walked leisurely along the contour path in Newlands Forest, clambered down stone steps to Rose Memorial Tea Room, then strolled the Fynbos walk in Kirstenbosch Gardens. Just another easy walking Sunday. We walked rapidly round my high school sports field on the annual Big Walk. Our tackies white, we pumped our arms. You were walking to lose weight. I was walking to win. We walked briskly from the car to the Chinese restaurant. Your dress tight, your high heels clicked the pavement. On the way home, a drunk driver crashed into us head on, twisting your knee, dislodging my 10-year-old front teeth. We walk slowly from the chapel to the grotto at Nazareth House. I carry you in an eco urn. You always loved this building, the gardens, the heavenly view of Table Mountain. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we unmute and clap for Stephen? It was so moving. Thank you so much, Stephen. Wow. What a journey you took us on.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to ask anything, say anything? You are very welcome to raise your hand if you know how to do that. If you don't, you can unmute yourself. And if you're shy, you can also type a question or comment in the chat. I see Jacques' hand up first. We can't hear or see you yet, Jacques. Still nothing?
Can't hear you, Jacques.
Be having some trouble, Jacques. I'll come back to you. If you manage to unmute yourself, just do it. Is there anyone else in the meantime who'd like to engage?
John.
Yeah, go for it, John.
All right. Since my platform's so unstable, I'll limit it to haiku. Haiku number 49. I am emptiness, a heart floating in the void. Mountain is jealous.
Thank you. We'll have open mic just now, but thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have a question for Stephen? Ed, hi.
Hi, Stephen. I think
Hi,
I have a question. Hi, it's to do with the humorous poems and the more serious sort of searching poems. Did you find it easier to write one or the other, or were they did they come to you sort of as they came to you? Sorry, it's a not quite. Was it more difficult to write about your mother?
Yeah, that gives me an opportunity to give a long answer, which I'm going to take. So I've had a very strange poetic career, if I can call it that. I wrote quite a lot at school when Dorian Haroff was my teacher. So if you think I'm an old fart, imagine how old he is. Hi, Dorian. So I wrote at school, and actually I remember reading one of Dorian's first chapbooks, I think, in 1976 or 77, Wrist and Rib. Anyway, so I wrote at school and then wrote at university, and then I left South Africa, went away for 23 years and wrote very little because I was busy having a career and focusing entirely on work. And I came back to South Africa and carried on working. But I also had a colleague who said, I think I'm going to do the MA in creative writing. And she did, and she was in her 60s. And so she did that at UWC and persuaded me to do it as well. Although I said, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I've got too much work, I can't fit this in. And she said, you should do it though. And I said, all right, I will. And so I did the MA in creative writing, and it was so inspiring. I had Kobus Moolman as my poetry mentor. And then after that, I worked with Fanula Dowling. And so I got back into writing poetry, which I hadn't done for a long time. And the main reason that I started writing all these poems, including those about my mother, is because I had homework to do. So they were assignments, they were weekly assignments on the MA course, and then there were Fanula's workshops every month. So you have to produce. So once poetry was back on my to-do list, along with all the work stuff I had to do, I started writing poetry again. And I really don't think it would have happened if it wasn't for that. So it wasn't really that it was easier to write one or the other. I've always enjoyed humor and humorous poetry, and I like writing that. Sometimes it comes easily. But the ones about my mother came because I was in a very productive writing phase, and that was the most intense emotional thing happening at the time. So yeah, it was actually easy in the sense that, these episodes that I write about are real. So they are almost like diary entries, some of them. Yeah.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed those especially, and also the contrast between all the in your reading that you juxtaposed, that you had both. And is there a book in the works? Is there a book in the pipeline?
That would be nice. My manuscript that I produced for the MA I was submitted to Dryad Press and got shortlisted, but didn't quite make it. But as a result of that, one of my reward for getting shortlisted was to be introduced to Fanula, who reviewed it. And so I started working with her. And I've been discussing with Fanula the last 6 months or so about possibly writing a book. I would like to do that, but I'm not quite sure how to go about it. So all of you published poets there can give me advice. I'm very happy to hear. I can see many published poets there, people who've got books out. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Okay,
Jacques
Jacques, I
is still
see you
trying.
back. Let's see if this works. Nothing yet, Jacques. Still not. Your Zoom is not your friend tonight. No. Okay, anybody else while we see if Jacques manages to get his technology to work? I'm curious with your poems about your mother. Oh, there we can see Jacques. Maybe something's happening.
Oh,
Hey,
that's great. You
Jacques.
can finally hear me too.
Yes.
It's a bit of an adventure.
Jacques, the darkness is illuminated. We can see you.
Well, that's wonderful if it works that way. I loved your reading, and I particularly love those moments where you seem to collapse time. There's a kind of there's a mystical element.
Alert from Jennifer.
So I think the one time you do it, you play with the possibility of breathing the fire, exhaling the fire back into the lamp, and the other time, which is that gesture is fascinating because it's impossible, and at that moment the poem becomes something else. I wonder if you want to say something about that moment and how it felt to write it. There's another moment where I feel you collapse time, and that's in the poem about your mother, where you are walking with her at different times. But I think I'm particularly fascinated by that moment where you ask someone to exhale the fire back into the lamp, to be safe or to still be alive. I don't know if you want to say something about that moment.
Thank you, Jacques. That's very perceptive. One of the things that bothers me about my writing is that I want to write like John Ashbery, who is an extremely obtuse and elliptical poet, but I find very inspirational to read. And I try to write like him, and I just can't. And so I end up writing these sometimes rather descriptive journal entry type poems. And I feel like poetry shouldn't be descriptive. And I always disliked poetry, which was just prose chopped up into lines, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I always try to find something transcendental. I think poetry should be transcendental in some way. And that moment in that poem that you mentioned was, I would say, a transcendental moment where it goes beyond reality, beyond description, into something else. So yeah, I tried to do that. I remember once when Dorian, I'm mentioning you again, Dorian, when Dorian reviewed one of my early manuscripts a long time ago. We were in Namibia together, I think, and one of Dorian's comments said was, your last lines are sometimes weak. So Dorian, it's probably because of you that I put more effort into my last lines these days. Yeah. But I do dislike descriptive poetry, which simply is prose just chopped up into lines, which then becomes a poem. I don't necessarily believe in traditional forms. I do write free verse, and I'm happy with that. But I do think poetry should be more than just prose.
When you say transcendental, do you mean that it should suggest other domains, or that it should teach something?
It should speak to something beyond what it's describing.
Right.
It should evoke something in the reader,
right,
which touches you in a way which is beyond just saying, "Oh, that's interesting," or "That's a nice turn of phrase." It should do something to you. It should move you. It should touch your soul.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, thank you.
It can also entertain, which is why I like writing humorous poetry as well. There's nothing wrong with entertaining.
Absolutely. And we have a question in the chat from Jennifer asking, is it therapeutic while writing poetry, a break from your academic writing?
That's a great question, Jennifer. Thank you. Well, all I've ever been able to do is write. I have no skills in the world, but I can write, and that's what I've always enjoyed doing more than anything else. So some people said, when I said I'm taking up poetry and doing this MA in creative writing at the age of 59, 60, they said, well, don't you have enough writing in your life already? Shouldn't you do something more active, more engaged with the world than just sitting at your desk writing all the time? But yes, I do write a lot for my work. And so having the opportunity to write something different and to think in a different way than simply writing work things is definitely therapeutic. It's what I call my my work balance. It's not, it doesn't give me more time for real life, but it does give me a bit of balance between my work, my writing work, and my poetry work. It's not work, it's really therapeutic. It's a good word for it. It's very therapeutic.
Good to hear that, Stephen. Thank you. And thanks so much for sharing your poetry. Loved it.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You. I was going to ask your mother poems. Did you find, you spoke of writing some of them during your MA. Did you find you needed kind of space from that time of her specifically aging rapidly at the end? Or were you writing these things in the moment more and then coming back to them later and editing or whatever?
Okay, so the mother poems weren't written during the MA itself. Maybe one or two were, but obviously she passed on last year, and I did the MA 2019, 2020. So what the MA did for me is it released this ability to think and write in a poetic way. Let me put it like that. And so I started writing again, and it was the tools and the way of thinking and looking at the world that I acquired through working with Querbus and by the way, also Meg van der Merwe and Julia Martin, and then with Fanula, which gave me the mental space to start writing about my mother when she got ill and then passed away. So it wasn't part of the MA. But I should also say that there are a lot of very dark poems about my childhood and my mother in my childhood and my father during my childhood, and also episodes of depression, which are what my mother would call my morbid poems, which I didn't choose to share tonight because I wanted this to be a testament to her, and she would prefer the light poems anyway, but I also wanted to use the opportunity to remember her.
Thank you for clarifying that. That makes a lot of sense, that the ball started rolling with the MA. Anyone else with a comment or question before we? Yeah, got Ed's hand went back up, yeah?
I know, Stephen, I just wanted to say that I particularly enjoyed the mother poems for the way that you explore memory. There's that one poem that starts with a memory sort of falling, I think, and there's another memory that gets merged with it. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say more about memory in those poems, but it seems like you play with memory and what we remember.
Yeah, my mother got dementia, and it was rather rapid. So it was only the last 2 or 3 years of her life, really. But when she got dementia, it was quite obvious that she was getting things mixed up in rather bizarre ways. She would see people and think they were people who'd been dead many years, things like that. But the idea I was trying to capture in this poem that I can't find now, it was Roaming Holiday, I think. Yeah, in Roaming Holiday, let me read that again. There's a memory not yet lost that she pulls down from the top shelf when I visit, but it hooks another memory on the way down and tumbles them together into something new. I found that she was doing that a lot. She was making associations between different people, thinking one person is somebody else and then attaching a lot to that memory or that misattribution, and doing things like what Jacques mentioned, collapsing time. So she would be living back in the time when she was at work and she'd retired 30 years ago, but she would be remembering things and saying, I must go to work now. The doctor's waiting for me to come. She worked at Proteskier. And she would be literally living that life again. She was in that moment back in 1993 or whatever. And I found that it was very strange to observe, of course, but it was also a way of living which seemed to work for her, even though she had dementia. It didn't make sense in day-to-day life today, but in her world, it was a way of functioning, which which I was seeing and seeing it
Alert
getting
from
worse all the
Khadija to
time,
everyone.
and getting to the point where I was worrying that she wouldn't recognize me anymore. And it never got quite to that point. And up to
Alert
that
up.
point, I still felt it's okay. She's still there. You know, she's still there. She's living in this world, which is not quite where I am, but I can recognize the associations that she's making. I can understand how she's collapsed these two memories together, or these two periods of time. And I was still relating to her at that point. If she had got to the point when she didn't recognize me, that would have been very difficult. Yeah.
Thank you. Very moving poems.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you wrote them and shared them with us. Thank you.
And then Khadija in the chat has also said, I enjoyed your poems. How did you feel writing the poems about your mum? Did it help with healing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Khadija. Absolutely helped. You know, I'm not a very physically emotional person, but I internalize a lot of emotion. And so it was a difficult time, obviously. It always is. We all know what it's like losing a loved one, as they say. And this was my way of coping, for sure. And I felt it was the most appropriate way of coping for me and healing.
All right. Anybody else with a last chance to engage? No, looks like everyone's questioned out. Okay, so thank you so much, Stephen, for your beautiful poems, your funny poems, your entertaining poems, and your moving poems, and for all your honest answers to the questions. We will take a little break now, and then we'll do open mic.